All right, I'm Andy Yan. I am a senior planner at Bingtom Architects and a researcher with BTA Works, the firm's research and development arm. And I've been invited to provide a few comments as well as be the thematic leader for this panel this evening. I'd like to thank very much Penny and Tom for inviting me to give a few comments as well as kind of following in the footsteps of and standing on the shoulders of a giant that certainly has influenced a lot about my planning career from my time at the University of California, Los Angeles to UBC. I'm also an adjunct professor here. That I'd like to thank everyone for coming, as well as also highlight thank Jonathan Barrett and Frank Ducote, who have been two wonderful tutors at the Bingtom Finishing School for Wayward and Recovering Academics. So given that environment, I wanted to kind of first provide a very short kind of slide series, because thinking about the region has been effectively my entire existence for the last 8 weeks of my life. And so these are some slideshows, some slides that we have clipped to kind of bring about this kind of discussion of the region and perhaps some of the challenges that we face moving forward together. That perhaps one of the kind of interesting things to note is that the discussion about Vancouver as a region really is not necessarily something that has started in recent times, but actually dates back well into the 1946 with the Bartholomew Plan. And really, as this approach to regional planning with Harlan Bartholomew and his work as an engagement to sprawl. As back in 1946, there were no words to sprawl, but it was called decentralization. And he kind of came up with this kind of concept of really a new, larger, lower Fraser River Valley region that I'm hoping that Bob Williams will talk about in his commentary to John's presentation. And I think it's from there, it's kind of remarkable to kind of note that on 0.3% of the land base of British Columbia, which Metro Vancouver occupies, that's half the provincial population and half of the GDP. So we've done extraordinarily a lot on remarkably little. And yet it emphasizes, I think, the critical importance of good and transparent planning in this region. And it's from there, it's also to note how this region's changed, that very much the center of Vancouver and this kind of center of the population in 1961 was really centered in and around close to Vancouver, still in Vancouver in 1961, but kind of how remarkable that since 1961, how much this point has changed, as we've clearly seen growth move south to the southeast, to the point that in 2011 that it's just the center point's just outside the city of New Westminster. But when we kind of break down the population groups, that really kind of understanding one of the driving forces behind why there is such growth in the outer suburbs, particularly south of the Fraser, it really comes down to age. And that when we talk about children, particularly children under the age of 18, that the point actually springs further southeast to almost crossing the Fraser, and that one kind of understands how youth is actually moving out into the suburbs of Vancouver, or formerly the suburbs in Vancouver. And really the kind of challenge, the counterpoint to this kind of growth of youth outside of the city of Vancouver, really the kind of aging of our city cores, that it actually goes the other point when one looks at the other way, that when one looks at at populations over the age of 65. So it's from that discussion one kind of begins looking at, well, when it comes to urbanism, that yes, we have accomplished a lot in urbanism in Vancouver, in Metro Vancouver, but there's still so much more. That in many ways, when it comes to density and the way we live, Vancouver, Metro Vancouver is perhaps closer to Calgary than Toronto or Montreal. That in Toronto and Montreal, when it comes to not only high-rise, but when it comes to kind of the mid-rise, and in particular, the kind of townhouse densities through which you see dramatic shifts in transportation behavioral changes, that Vancouver is significantly less than Toronto or Montreal. But then at the same time, one has to note that the remarkable, I think, wins in the region. And part of this comes in towards how we're not necessarily sprawling, that very much that Vancouver has been able to hold the line when it comes to to commute patterns, that we are the same amount of people that are living and working in the city of Vancouver are living and working in 2001, are living and working in 2011. But I think the other accomplishment, and I think part of the panel could perhaps talk about, is actually how much Surrey, actually the physically largest city in the region, has been able to shift, and how its shift is actually, I think, quite admirable and quite remarkable to see many more people living and working within the city of Surrey as opposed to commuting in just 10 short years. And so, but at the same time, I think that there's one aspect is the economic aspect of our region, that very much we are not a city of very large firms, that we are a city of small to mid-sized firms, that 75% of our firms in Metro Vancouver, 78% to be precise, is actually under 10 people. But then it's from this kind of, this type of small firm configuration, I think there are opportunities to explore alternative types of economy, alternative means of organizing that perhaps I think the speakers following me could talk about. But then at the same time, we face profound challenges when it comes to incomes, as well as incomes, how we compare in performance to other regions, that compared to other regions, other city regions in Canada and the United States, we actually perform rather poorly, with Calgary as a Canadian region on top, but that Vancouver, as when it comes to per capita income, is really in and about the grouping of Reno, Sacramento, or Nashville, when it comes to per capita and income performance. Kind of coming there is within that type of income is really, I think, the profound challenges facing every city, but I think this city, that Metro Vancouver is not an exception, that we face coming down and becoming the bipolar city, that for every household that is earning over $100,000 a year, there is a household earning about $30,000 a year, and that there is that kind of hollowing out of the middle, which I think produces profound challenges moving forward in this region. So, and I think another aspect is really how it's actually a region. I should change the slide title. A region from all over. That when we talk about Vancouver, it's really a population that's about a third that's actually born within the province of British Columbia, but which is actually, I think, quite interesting when we talk about really how we're a city of diasporas. That very much when it comes to Richmond, yes, indeed, it's 30% of the people who live in Richmond were actually born with. Actually, out of curiosity, within this crowd, who was born in the province of British Columbia? Okay, bias sample. But this, I think, shapes actually how different Metro Vancouver is, and Vancouver is to other cities in Canada and the United States. That when it comes to Calgary, we actually have a much higher amount of folks who are born within each province, such as with Calgary, Toronto, and certainly to the highs of Montreal and Ottawa. But I think what's kind of interesting is when we look at gateway cities, when we look at cities in Seattle or Los Angeles or New York, that Vancouver actually is very much more a city of strangers or newcomers than those cities, and how we compare to those cities. So really, I think another aspect is really the kind of challenges of creating a common regional culture, that when we look at how we vote, these are voting patterns within the last provincial election, that very much within this section, which is Metro Vancouver, that very much that we have this type of, I think, gap in political cultures and how we vote in the region, that perhaps one of our challenges isn't necessarily building more bridges across the Fraser River, but building bridges amongst very different, perhaps, political ideologies. And really, I think I'll close in this kind of series of comments, and to bring on the main show, that this is really, I think, perhaps part of a larger kind of question, and really, I think, part of the challenge in our coming symposium today, that really this is almost like one of the classic views of the city of Vancouver, this kind of, mountains and skyscrapers and Vancouverism at its most pristine and nice sunny day, of course, at its finest. But really, I think moving forward, that as we kind of talk about the future, that this is very much talking about the past and the present, but really talking about the future of the region and the future, even within that, talking about the future of Vancouver, but also Surrey, of Richmond, of Burnaby, that we need to flip that camera right around. That very much this is the view when you flip that camera around, not looking at Stanley Park, but towards Surrey, but towards Richmond, that this is very much the region that we actually inhabit. So that ends my initial set of comments for John's paper.